I just want to say a quick thank you to all you in the Graceologie community who have rated the show on iTunes or who have written a short review. It makes such a difference. And thanks to all of you who have shared on social media using the Graceologie hashtag. You guys are so awesome. It means so much, and it honestly helps so much. So if you happen to be listening and you've not yet done any of this, I would really appreciate it. Would you click your podcast app or go visit iTunes and give us a 5-star rating or just a quick 1-sentence review? Truly, from my heart, it would mean so much. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Graceologie with Gwen Smith podcast. I'm Gwen Smith, and I am so glad you've joined us today. Around here, we have fun, faith-focused, grace-filled conversations, all to help you know and trust God more. Our discussions are honest, often humorous, and always practical, and they're going to encourage you in meaningful ways to live out and lean on the grace of Jesus in the midst of cluttered, messy days. You got any of those? I know I do. And I can't wait to get to today's conversation because my friend Dr. Veirdre Jackson is joining me for this episode. Veirdre is an award-winning author, educator, entrepreneur, and advocate. She's the CEO and founder of Living Strong Consulting, whose passion is to encourage women who have been impacted by adverse experiences to live bold, abundant, and on purpose, body, mind, and spirit. In today's episode, Dr. Veirdre Jackson and I talk about how our beliefs can have tendency to control our behavior. Worry and anxiety plague so many women, but how can we rewire our brains to focus on the true blessings of God? How can we walk in the grace that God has given us, especially after traumatic events in our lives? We all find ourselves in these places throughout our walks with the Lord, and Veirdre gives some practical steps on how to process through worry and toxic thinking in order to bring a renewed peace and trust in God. We've split this episode into 2 parts because there's so much depth and value to what Veirdre shares about overcoming fear, coping with toxic stress, and retraining your mind. I just didn't want you to miss a thing. So let's take a moment to thank one of today's sponsors and then dive right into part 1. Today's episode of the Graceologie with Gwen Smith podcast is sponsored by my absolute favorite seasonal subscription box, FabFitFun. Receive 20% off your first box when you go to fabfitfun.com and use the code Graceologie. Have you tried it yet? If you don't already know about FabFitFun, it's a seasonal box with high-quality, full-sized beauty, fitness, and lifestyle products. I love it so much. It retails for $49.99, but always has a value of over $200. And getting your FabFitFun box in the mail actually feels like it's your birthday, like 4 times a year. I love it. So head over to fabfitfun.com and use coupon code Graceologie for 20% off your first box. I'm telling you, you're going to love it. Hey, my friend Veirdre, I'm so excited to welcome you to the Graceologie podcast today.
Thank you so much, Gwen. I am excited to be with you and all of your listeners.
Well, I'm excited to have you. I love to get to know my guests and let my Graceologie community get to know you in a fun, kind of casual kind of way.
Awesome.
So you game? You ready for the fast, fun favorites round?
I sure am.
Okay. Veirdre, bubble bath or hot shower?
Ooh, hot shower.
Okay, what's your favorite holiday?
I'd have to say Christmas.
Mm-hmm. What's the first record or CD you ever bought?
Oh, good gracious. First one, it had to have been a Jackson 5 or something along those lines. Way back.
Okay, Monopoly or charades?
Oh, I don't like board games. Okay, we'll say charades.
There you go. Mascara or lip gloss?
Mascara.
Houseplants or black thumb?
I'm such a black thumb.
Me too, girl. What's the scariest thing you've ever done?
Ooh. Well, it was scary at the time, but no longer. I think my first Broad Street run here in Philadelphia, it was 10 miles. And I just was sure, it was about 7 years ago, and I was sure I was going to die on the course.
Well, that would be scary to me. So I get your apprehension there. What is your guilty pleasure?
Chocolates.
Dark or milk?
Milk.
What was your favorite TV show when you were a kid?
Brady Bunch.
I loved the Brady Bunch. That's so funny. I was thinking that same thing.
I see all the squares.
Oh, I know. Me too. Okay, so where is the most interesting place you've ever been?
I guess it would have to be Egypt.
Ooh.
To spend our honeymoon in Cairo and Hurghada.
Now, what made you choose that?
My husband and I are both educators. We enjoy history. We enjoy knowledge. So the whole thought of climbing into the pyramids and riding along the Nile, it was just so right up our alley.
That's so cool. What's your favorite Bible verse?
2 Timothy. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind.
Love that one. Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Oh, I am a morning person. Absolutely, all the way.
Who is your favorite boy band?
Oh, I'm dating myself, but it would have to be New Edition.
Oh, okay. Puppies or kittens?
Puppies.
They're the best. Mm-hmm. Favorite sports teams?
Golden State. I think if I said anything other than that, my daughter would strangle me.
What about football?
I have to be Eagles.
Yeah, you're kind of in that area. Yeah.
Really?
Okay, and what time do you get up?
Between 3:30 and 4 a.m. every day.
Oh, my glory. That's bananas. Okay, and then your final question is, what is your favorite emoji?
Oh, the hand on the face. Where you're like,
face plant.
Yes.
That's good. See, now I feel like, we've got the formal Veirdre Jackson and now we've got the fun Veirdre Jackson. And I think that they are all one and the same because I have met you in person and we have hung out and I just love you.
Oh, I love you too. Like immediately.
I want to thank Covenant Eyes for sponsoring today's Graceologie episode. Ladies, we know we have a hypersexualized world. Marketers are using sex to sell everything from handbags to hamburgers, and the temptation is great. Most Christian men say they struggle with looking at pornography at least once a month. Do something about it by protecting your home with Covenant Eyes. It recognizes when inappropriate images are viewed and lets a trusted friend know about it, which opens up conversations, which leads to freedom. You can try it for 30 days for free. Just go to covenanteyes.com and enter Graceologie at the checkout to receive your first 30 days for free. Again, that's covenanteyes.com. Enter the promo code Graceologie for your first 30 days for free. So why don't you just give us the backstory? Who is Veirdre Jackson? Where did you come from? Tell us who you are.
I was raised mostly in the Maryland, D.C. area, but much of my family is in Memphis, Tennessee. Growing up in kind of that southern environment, but I moved north with the intention of becoming a fashion designer. And went through that time period, absolutely love fashion, love design, but it was not my hard work. And I remember coming back home, being crushed, thought I was lost, sat in my chair, in my dad's chair. And he said, "So what are you going to do?" I said, "I think I want to go back to school and get my master's to work with children." And he looked right at me and he said, "I have been waiting all this time for you to figure out that that's what you were meant to do."
No way.
I said, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" He said, because you needed to find your way. You needed to figure that out on your own. But a heart for children is absolutely who you are since you were 10 years old and you asked to be a counselor. Working with children has been what you thrive in. And so I went to Temple, got my master's in elementary education, and then went to Wilmington University for my doctorate in educational leadership and innovation, and began to work with the children that were the hardest to reach, that adults struggled to understand their behavior. And I found my heart work, and it allowed me to start a nonprofit and really work with children from all different backgrounds, but that were challenged, that people weren't understanding, that couldn't find a place, that couldn't find a space that welcomed who they were and understood their story of what the struggle was that brought them to that place. And in the process of doing that work, I actually burned myself out. I found that I put my identity into the work and worked myself into a state of toxic stress that I actually physically fell apart and ended up needing to have surgeries and discovered the power that toxic stress plays on our body. And when God sat me down, although he had been whispering in my ear for quite some time that it's time for you to step out and start your own business. And I kept saying, no. I just want a promotion. I want the security of a job. I just want a promotion. But just the toxicity within my body just kept growing. And it got to the point where I had decided that I had the plan and I had found the promotion that I wanted. And just as soon as I was going to start the job, it disappeared. So I found myself without the job that I wanted, and I was sick. And he sat me down for me to listen. And I opened my soul and my heart to actually listen to what he had been telling me and lay my trust in who he is and the character that he promises. And I launched my own company, Living Strong Consulting, in 2016. And although most of our work is working with either for-profits or nonprofits that have a mission to work with communities, we build leaders, we work with teams, we help organizations actually live out the mission that's written on the wall, but how do they make it sustainable? Much of that time is working with organizations that work with children and families that have been impacted by adversity and trauma. And that's my heart work. I absolutely love to conduct trainings with educators who are in the thick of it, of communities where children and parents, single moms, single dads, who are in the thick of adversity and trial, and they are experiencing the aftermath of that physically, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. And going in and identifying ways to help them understand what is happening neurologically with them, physically, but then also providing practical tools and approaches to help them find their way to a healthier place.
That is good work. That is such meaningful work. But I notice that it was a place of unrest that has taken you to this new mission. And you talked about having placed your identity in your workforce in the past. And why do we do that? I mean, I think that as listeners, they're all going, oh, yeah, honey. I mean, we have such a tendency to place our identities in the position, whether it's on a business card or for a stay-at-home mom or for a single mom. You know, we care about whether we're this, that, or the other thing. How was that toxic for you? And what lessons did God teach you in the bringing out?
So it was toxic for me in that I allowed everything that was happening around me to enter into me. And I felt responsible for making it happen. And the challenging thing was, it was all work that I was doing for the Lord at the time. The nonprofit was a Christian nonprofit. It was working in a community. But I had placed so much pressure on myself to get it done. And with any failing, anything that went wrong, I was holding on to that. And the circumstances began to define who I was, instead of me being able to separate myself and acknowledge that what I'm going through is not necessarily who I am, what I'm called to do. And it wasn't until I became crystal clear on how toxic stress actually impacts our neurological pathways, that actually when we enter into those patterns of toxic stress, of toxic self-talk, of toxic narratives, how that actually creates a repeated pattern that we become so attached to that we're unable to separate ourselves from. And it was in that process of really holding on to, Lord, I just want to do what you have called me to do. And he sat me down and allowed me to listen to what he instructs about fear, about toxicity, about renewing the mind, that it wasn't until I was able to pull those things apart that I've now been able to walk out a different story.
Hey guys, do you ever get frustrated when you read the Bible because it seems hard to understand? Let me tell you, you are not alone. And that's why I've created a 5-part online inductive Bible study called the Psalm Adventure to help make Bible study more simple. Listen, I've had tons of conversations and I've heard from so many of you asking how you can understand Scripture and know what God has to say about things like forgiveness and finances and healing and fear and anxiety and relationships. You want to know how to connect your personal struggles to the promises of God. That's exactly what we explore in the Psalm Adventure, because we go right to the source of all grace and all truth, the Bible. Join me for a free Psalm Adventure. When you do, you'll get weekly instructions and videos where you and I hang out and where we talk about what we've read that week and seek God's heart together and pray and grow as a Graceologie community. Even if you've never done a Bible study before in your life, I promise you, this Psalm Adventure is doable. Consider this your personal invitation. It is time to gain some clarity in the Word and to experience a renewed hope and strength and peace that is only found in the presence of God. So learn more about the free online studies and register today by visiting gwensmith.net/psalmadventure. That's gwensmith.net/psalmadventure. If we're being honest, and we're all about honesty around here, those toxic behaviors, we all have them to some degree. So clearly God has worked through your life and taught you, and I know it's in the Word because I know you. But one of the scripture references that obviously teaches this whole journey towards the renewal of our minds is found in Romans 12:2. And I know that you have learned a great deal from that text. And so I would love for you to lead us on a path to what do we do with these toxic places of stress in our lives that will help lead us through the Word to a place to where we actually can hit a stride to experience that joy of the Lord that might get lost in the weeds of toxic stuff?
Absolutely. So I love talking about how God has specifically instructed us to renew our mind. He tells us to not conform to the patterns of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of our mind. And how, if we acknowledge that at any given point in time, any of us are in one of 5 brain states. And a part of what I am now beginning to fully embrace is the work that I do out in the secular world with looking at adversity and trauma and how it actually neurologically impacts individuals, and aligning that with what the Word of God says. You know, there's so often I'll be reading a psychotherapy textbook or a neurological text, and I'll read a passage that informs us how science has actually seen how love physically heals the brain. And it will resonate in me that I will go to Scripture. No wonder our God says to love, right? He's giving us clear instruction to heal the body that He created and gave us. And so when I think about some of the work that I've done working with Dr. Bruce Perry's text, and he identifies 5 brain states that all of us as human beings at any given period in time, we are in one of 5. We're either in a calm state, we're either in an alert state, an alarm state, a fear state, or a terror state. And when we are in one of those 5 states, it actually impacts our ability to think. So we can only actually think in our creative place if we're in a calm state of mind.
Wow.
The farther down in brain states we go, as we move into alert, we become more concrete thinkers. When we move down into alarmed, we become an emotional thinker. When we move down into fear, we become a reflexive thinker. And when we go all the way down into a terror state, it is literally on an autopilot state. It just happens without us even thinking about it. So when we think about that, all of us are in one of those 5 places at any given point in time, because we are wired, our brain is wired to be use dependent. So whatever we use the most continues to replicate itself. It begins to have our brain actually become wired, most densely wired in that state, because we're telling our brain that we need that state most often.
So it becomes like our default.
Absolutely. So when we're in that fear place, when we're in that emotional place, our brain reacts in fight, flight, or freeze, right? But something that is supposed to just be a signal to tell us to respond and then shut off, if we remain in that place where we constantly churn out worry, or we recycle emotional responses, our body is releasing that same fight, flight, or freeze response, chemicals through our body over and over and over again, which is impacting the wiring of our brain as well as our body, our physical body.
Yeah, I know that there's that right now. You've just perked up the ears of a lot of women, because that's one thing I hear over and over again is that I'm a worrier. And people attribute that to themselves. Like they say that about themselves. It's not, I have a problem with worrying. It's, I'm a worrier. They literally say it of themselves, which I think is a problem right there. Talk to that woman. Like what comes to your heart when you think of a woman who says, but I'm a worrier?
There's a quote that resonated with me, and the quote says, worry is a form of self-harassment.
Ooh.
Right?
Wow.
Shifts everything for me. Even in how you just shared it, when a woman says, I am a worrier, you've now placed your identity on something that actually has no healthy practice for you or your body. Wow. It is a form of self-harassment. Now, if somebody outside of yourself was harassing you, we would raise up
yes.
and go against that, right? So we have to take the same internal indignation to say, I will not harass myself with repeated toxic self-thought, self-talk, or even label myself with anything other than what God is calling me.
Now we're talking. So really, with what you said earlier, what you're going through, and it could also be extended to or what you're feeling, does not define who you are. And I think if we just start there, we're moving in the right direction. And I love the empowering statement that you're saying. You're saying basically that's not okay. and it's high time that the daughters of God stop defining themselves in ways that are contrary to the way God defines us.
Absolutely. And I think even connecting back to what we were just talking about. So I often use an analogy of a tree. If we think about the brain like a seed, and it's planted in the ground. So once the seed is in soil, what does it begin to sprout out? Roots, yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. And so as roots come out, our brain, those roots become the coping strategies for us to survive whatever experiences we are going through. And whether they are toxic or healthy, we create coping strategies to survive that space. But when that seed continues to grow, those roots continue to sprout out, what comes up and out of the ground, the tree, the trunk of the tree actually becomes our core belief of what we believe to be true about ourselves, about the world around us, about other people, and even about our God. And as we shift and identify what that core belief is, it then drives the fruit, which is our behavior. So it's not necessarily when we call ourselves anything other than what God is calling us, we have to go back into that root system and identify what coping strategies am I using that are shifting my core belief about who God says I am. Because our belief controls our behavior.
Yes.
So we can shift out of worry if we connect with what is it that I'm believing to be true about me, about my God, and about the surrounding environment I'm placing myself in.
Yes. Wow. So what do we do if the coping strategies down in the depth of the root of who we are toxic instead of healthy? Speak to that, listener. So there's women listening who for sure know that, okay, I know that this is not what God says in my life. And, whether it be worry or other ways of self-harassment, which is essentially us calling ourselves, I'm such a, or I'm so stupid, or I'm so this. So what do we do? What do we do if that is the toxic coping strategy that our root system defaults to?
You know what? Something that I oftentimes help individuals understand is that it takes a process, right? So many times we will go to a session, a seminar, we'll hear something amazing, and we may have been in the basement about our awareness of what's happening to us, and we step up onto the step of awareness, and now we're aware. But so often, myself, others, we will make the misstep and believe that just because I'm aware, I now should be doing something different. When there's actually a whole step in between coming out of the basement onto the step of awareness. Before action, we have to stand on the step of understanding. Understand the habits and the patterns that are broken. When we understand those habits and those patterns, we're then able to step up into action. And then the last step is reflection. And so standing on that step of understanding, it really requires us to think about what we're thinking about.
Ooh.
So the beauty of our brain, our mind, why God tells us to renew our mind is because he gave us a gift, and it's called metacognition. He has given us the ability to, when a thought enters our head, for us to pause and say, why am I thinking that? Where did that come from? He has given us that gift. And that's a part of the process of renewing our mind. When we're standing on that step of understanding, so say, for example, fear is an issue for you. Mm-hmm. Now, we all can have our own perceptions of what fear means. And if we even broke down the word fear into each letter, and we said someone could enter into fear, and their meaning for fear was forget everything and run, right? So you could say that might be how you enter into fear, or you might say failure expected and received. If that's the way you look at fear, if that's what you believe about fear, then your behavior every time that emotion comes up, your behavior is going to reflect what you believe to be true about fear. Fear in and of itself isn't a bad thing. Right. The word doesn't say that we can't have the emotion. It's simply a stress response signal. It simply is just a signal helping us to be aware that we need to react or respond. In truth, if the emotion came up and we could pause and say, what has me being afraid? And we were able to shift our understanding or our belief around fear. And we were able to shift that to saying possibly face everything and rise. I had that perspective around fear. When fear happened, my response to it would be completely different from someone who is saying failure expected and received, right? Yeah. So it's thinking about what if I'm standing on that step of understanding, what meaning am I placing to the emotion or the thought that comes to mind?
Wow. Be sure to swing over to the show notes to learn more about Dr. Veirdre Jackson and her company Live Strong Consulting. Also be sure to connect with her on social media. Today's show was edited by Chad Chooping, and the music is by PremiumBeat.com. If you have any questions, comments, or topic suggestions, send me an email directly from my website, gwensmith.net. Notes and links can be found for each episode over at gwensmith.net/Graceologie. That's gwensmith.net/Graceologie. I hope you've enjoyed getting to know Veirdre in part 1. Now be sure to listen to part 2, where we dive even deeper into our conversation about renewing your mind, reframing fear, and restoring emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual wholeness. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you haven't already subscribed, please head over to iTunes and subscribe to the Graceologie with Gwen Smith podcast. Subscriptions and reviews on iTunes really do make a huge impact for those of us who are working hard to bring you these shows. And be sure to connect with me on social media. I'm at Gwen Smith Music on every platform. Now get out there and have a beautiful, grace-filled day. Thanks again to FabFitFun for sponsoring today's episode. Hey, be sure to run over to fabfitfun.com and use coupon code GRACEOLOGY for 40% off your first box.